Yeah, literature review is one important aspect that we cannot do without as researchers. All right. So we are going to start the definition of literature review. We know that a high quality literature review contains current theoretical and scientific knowledge about a specific topic. You may be doing any research, like my area of research is cancer care. So when I do literature review regarding my topic, the review usually identifies what is known and what is unknown about my topic. And nurses in clinical practice often they do literature review in order to synthesize the available evidence so that they can find a solution in a practice setting. Or some would do it just because they want to remain current in their practice. So people do that just to know what is existing in my area of clinical practice or my area of specialty. Now, as students and nurses, we read literature review, but while we do so, we must critically appraise the literature as well as other components of our research study. All right. When we are praising literature, it usually begins with understanding the purpose of this literature review, either in quantitative research or qualitative research, or even mixed method. Of course, there are slightly different approaches to quantitative or qualitative literature review, but there is still a lot of commonalities among them. Now, the mechanisms of literature review that will be discussed in this class today can be applied to both qualitative and quantitative research. So we know that a review of literature is just a process of finding relevant research reports and possibly theoretical sources. And then we critically appraise these sources, we synthesize them, and then generate the result, and then make accurate inference about what we have analyzed. And then we'll have a complete reference list. So it's a foundation for every research because that is where we determine what the problem is, if there's actually a problem or not. Okay. Now, in this class, we are going to include information of how to find references, how to select those that are relevant, how to organize what you have found, and then how to write a logical summary of your finding. So we'll go straight to the purpose of literature review. Sorry, something is not working out fine here, but I think we can see it. Yeah, the purpose of literature review. Literature review in published research reports typically provides the background for the problem that we are studying. For example, I do research in cancer care, and my current research is how to determine what time toxicity is all about. I sent you guys the one of my papers that was just published a few weeks ago. Yeah, on time toxicity in cancer care. Now, it was during the literature review I realized that there was a big problem. So after I did the concept analysis, right now I am trying to work out to develop a time toxicity index so that we can measure the burden of time, how this time burden affects patients who have cancers. Okay. Now it was because of literature review I was able to identify what currently exists and what does not exist. And now the area that does not exist, I'm now developing more studies so that I can explore it further. So when we are reviewing literature, we are describing the current knowledge of a practice problem. We are identifying the gap in this knowledge base area and also trying to explain how the study being reported has contributed to building knowledge in this particular area. So we are going to establish the research gap. We contextualize the study within the existing literature because we can't just study something out of nothing. Of course, there is a claim in qualitative research that we usually explore unknown But then that is a separate context. But generally, when we are beginning the research, we have to build it on something that is currently existing. So we use it to build a foundation for the conceptual and theoretical framework. And then we use it to support the research methodology. Now, the scope, sorry, can we mute our microphones if we are not talking so that we don't disturb other people? Thank you. All right. Now, the scope of a literature review must be broad enough to allow readers to become familiar with the research problem. And at the same time, it also has to be narrow enough to exclude. Bolanle, I think your microphone is, we are getting a feedback from your microphone, please. Are you able to mute it or you want me to do that for you? All right. I've helped you. Thank you. Now, so I said the scope of your search or your literature review has to be broad enough to allow readers to become familiar with the research problem. At the same time, it must be narrow enough to include only the most relevant sources. Now, I'm sure when you do literature review or literature search, sometimes you get thousands of articles, but it is not possible to review everything. So what we do is we narrow it down to a specific problem area. And that will now give us the only researches that address that specific problem area. Now, some people will ask, so what do we do when it comes to quantitative research? Does it differ from qualitative research? The literature review in quantitative is usually conducted to direct the planning and execution of any research. The major literature review is performed at the beginning of the research process, that is, before the study is conducted in the first place. Like I said, that is where we get the problem or the gap from. Now, a limited review is conducted after the study has been completed. Some people would usually just do a draft and then conduct their research. When the research is done, then they go back to do literature review. That is not the ideal thing. We are supposed to do a literature review even before we conduct the study because it is the review that directs where the problem is, the focus, the trend, and then where we can come in to solve an existing problem. Okay. So especially if the literature review is if the study has been completed and more studies have been reported or published after your study has been completed, you can actually go back and review those studies and then use them to support your research. But at the end of the day, the result of both the reviews you did before and those that you are doing afterwards will be included in the research report that you're going to write. Now, the purpose of literature review is similar for the different types of quantitative research, be it descriptive, correlational, quasi-experimental, or experimental. Okay? Quantitative research reports may include citations to relevant sources in all sections of the report. And that's why when you are doing your research, you start with the background or the introduction. Of course, you are going to reference certain sources. When you come to the statement of the problem, you reference certain sources. All those sources are products of literature review that you have done earlier before you even began the study. Now, for example, I'm doing a research in time toxicity. So there will be citations about the number of patients affected by time toxicity, which I'm going to derive from my literature review. The cost of treatment of cancer, I will get literature from it even before I start my research. The consequences in terms of how it affects human suffering, I will get research from it. Physical health, if it causes any disability or if there are mortality associated with time toxicity. So I will get those before I begin my research. And that is why literature review, most times we say literature review comes in chapter 2, but in earnest, it actually starts before we begin our research. So in the introduction part, The review of literature section may not be labeled. You may not write it in literature review, but then it is integrated within the introduction. The review within the introduction will include both the theoretical and research references that really document the current knowledge about that problem that you are studying. So, a researcher who is doing a quantitative research will develop a framework within the proposal and then use that framework to develop the research itself. But then that framework is actually obtained from literature review, and that is the conceptual review that we are talking about. Now, coming to qualitative, the introduction will be similar to what I've explained for the quantitative, because researchers will always document a background and the significance of the problem. But additional reviews of the literature may not be cited for two reasons. Apart from the background, the introduction, and the background, you may not do extensive literature review in qualitative for two reasons. One reason is that qualitative studies are often conducted on topics about what we know very little about. For example, I may be talking about the lived experience of people who are battling, I read the research of lived experience of daughters who are also cancer patients. The role conflict of being a daughter of somebody and you're also cancer patient. That is not a known area because lived experience is subjective. So you can't generalize a person's experience to other contexts. So that's why we may not really do extensive literature review while doing qualitative research. Now, the other reason is that some qualitative researchers will deliberately not review literature because they believe that when they do extensive literature review, they are going to be informed or they are going to be influenced by the data they get from the literature review. For example, if I'm studying lived experience of patients who are diagnosed with cancer, and I do extensive literature review, during the literature review, I already know how other people have experienced the same phenomenon. Now, by the time I'm collecting my data, the experience I already acquired from the literature review is going to influence my data collection, is going to influence my analysis, and also influence my interpretation. Although we encourage bracketing in qualitative research, but then when you already immerse yourself in the reality of those who experience that phenomenon, there's no how bracketing will be enough for you to be able to remove yourself from the data. So that's why people usually will not do extensive literature review when they are doing qualitative research. However, by the time they complete the research, they've collected their data, they've analyzed it, they can now go back to the literature and then do extensive literature review and use it to support whatever they have found. Now, the purpose, the extent, and timing of literature review would vary across the different types of qualitative research. For example, somebody who is doing phenomenological study would likely delay literature review until after data collection or during the initial analysis have been completed. Now, somebody who is doing grounded theory, we know grounded theory is also a theory building approach that we use data to generate theory. This would also require minimal review of literature at the beginning of the research process. At the initial time, the review is merely a means of making the researcher to be aware of the studies that have been conducted within that particular problem and also to know if the problem actually exists. But the information from the literature review would not in any way influence the data collection or theoretical development for the current research. Okay, now for somebody who is doing ethnography, now ethnography may be a little bit different because we are studying culture. Of course, when ethnography was started initially, they were exploring unexplored groups of people. There was no current literature about those people who have been explored. However, there were some theoretical and philosophical literature that were available and that continue to be available even to today, this literature, theoretical and philosophical literature, actually form the basis, the framework, or give them the perspective through which they approach the data collection. For example, I did an ethnography. I explored the how culture and institutional factors affect cancer care in Nigeria. I actually came down to UCH. I lived in Ibadan for 6 months. I went to UCH every day to explore how institutional factors, culture, and other realities impacted, cancer care. Now, that had not been studied before when I did my research. But then I used the philosophy and theoretical underpinnings of Magdalene Leininger, culture, care, diversity, and universality, or what we call the transcultural nursing. That was the framework I used. Of course, I had to do extensive literature review on that framework before I began my research. Although there was no research that showed me how culture, institutional factors in UCH would affect cancer care and cancer care processes in Nigeria. All right. So that is how an ethnographer would view literature review. Okay. Um, for those who are doing exploratory, descriptive, qualitative, they may conduct the study because they have reviewed the literature extensively and found that little knowledge is available. And that is why they are now doing the exploratory, descriptive, qualitative research. All right, so these are the purposes why we do literature review. And then at the end of the day, we are going to demonstrate that there is scholarly rigor. And then we are going to use the literature review to justify the significance of the research that we are conducting. All right. Now, sources included in a literature review. The literature is always is all written sources relevant to your selected topic. So it includes articles published in periodicals, includes journals, internet publication, monographs, encyclopedias, conference papers, thesis, dissertation, or textbooks, and any other material. So by the time we include these materials, we have to cite them. Of course, we know that a citation is the act of quoting a source and then paraphrasing the content from a particular source, using it as an example or presenting it as a support for a position that we have taken in our research. Now, each citation should have a corresponding reference in the reference list while we are extracting the reference. The reference is a documentation of the origin of the cited quote or the paraphrased idea. And generally, it provides enough information for the readers to locate the original materials. And that's why we need to be careful when we use ChatGPT in doing our research. ChatGPT, when you ask it to do literature review, I've done my personal research with it, and I've found out that it's just cook up references. Yeah. If you want to try it, go on ChatGPT, say, please generate reference for a particular research. It will just generate references, and these references are not true. Many of them are not true. It just put them together to make it look real. And that is why we have to be very careful when we use ChatGPT in doing research. Because when we do a literature review, the references we're including in the sources have to correspond with what we have cited in the paper. Okay, this information will be the name of the patient, of the author, the year, and the title of publication. And when it is necessary, in terms of periodical or monograph, we have to include their titles, volume pages, and other information that are required. Generally, we make use of APA, but there are different other sources, there are different other methods of citation that we are going to discuss later on. So these are the types of publications that we use. For some reason, I don't know what's going on. Anyways, these are the types of publications that we use: articles, periodicals, monograph, encyclopedias, conference proceedings, thesis, textbook, or website. These are valid sources of literature review. Although they have different levels, but these are valid sources that we can include in the literature review. Okay. We know what an article is. Article is just a piece of material that has been published for to project a particular topic area. Journals could include a compilation of multiple articles. Of course, monograph, or some call it monogram. Monogram is the content itself. Encyclopedia is a book of compiled contents, topic areas about a particular subject matter. We have encyclopedia of plants, encyclopedia of different topic area, conference proceedings, thesis or dissertation. Both masters and PhD level are called thesis and dissertation. I know the UK calls master dissertation and PhD thesis, but America calls it the other way around. Textbooks and website. All right. So now let's talk about the contents of publication. I don't know what is going on here. I think, okay. I'm sorry, I have to fix this, but I'll fix it before I send it to you. There's a duplication somewhere. All right. So reference the content of publication, references cited in literature review typically contains two types of content. We have the theoretical and the empirical. The theoretical content or theoretical literature includes the concept analysis. These are theory, they are not empirical. They are not based on data collected, original data collected. They are conceptual, they are theoretical. So when we do literature review on concept analysis, they are theoretical literature. On models, theories, conceptual framework, these can be used to support our research, but then they are not based on original data. However, the theoretical sources can be found in books. We read book of theory development, theory constructions, theoretical basis of nursing, history of nursing. These are theoretical sources of content. It could be from periodicals or could be from monographs. We have nursing theories that have written books a long time ago to describe the development and the content of their theories. For example, I did an ethnography, but within the ethnography, I used it to also develop a conceptual framework. So I had to review books that had been written. Magdalene Leininger's book was written, the first one was 1984. And then she revised it up to 1995. I think that was the last one she had, but she already has other people who are building on her theory. So these books can be used to support your research, although they are going to come with other references, but we will talk about that later on. Now, we use the conceptual or theoretical sources. We'll summarize them and use them to reflect on the current understanding of that research problem, and then use them to provide the basis for the research framework that we are going to use. But then the other one is the empirical literature, which is a section of an article that refers to the knowledge derived from that particular research. In other words, the knowledge is based on data from research. That is, it is data based. For example, if you do a research now and you collect data, you analyze data, you tell me 90% of people are this and 80% are this. That is, if I'm reviewing that literature, it's going to be empirical because it has to do with original data. And we can find this in journals, on the internet, in books, and also on published studies, such as the thesis and the doctoral dissertation. So these are acceptable sources of content for literature review. Now, while we have identified the sources of literature review, the next is to determine what the quality of those sources are. Now, we know that we have a lot of materials out there. Now, let me also use this opportunity to remind us that while we are very eager to send out our papers to publish everything, but let's be careful to always avoid predatory journals. Let's be careful to always avoid predatory journals. And I was discussing with somebody recently. I said I'm going to develop a task force very, very soon. And that task force is to call out any nursing author that publishes in any predatory journal. The reason why people go to predatory journal is because their work lacks rigor and they do not even trust what they have done. They just want to push it out for the sake of pushing research out. And most times when I see these journals or these papers, I feel disappointed. I feel disappointed. So don't be, when the task force is set up, don't be part of those people that will be called out on any platform we are going to use for publishing in predatory journals. Let's go for quality. Let somebody else review the work, not just because you are paying and then you get your work published within 2 minutes or within 3 or 4 days. Right, I've had researches, I've had people whose project or research was sent out for publication today. Within the next 4 days, they told me, hey, it has been published. The first thing I asked them is, how much did you pay? I paid 250,000 naira, and it was published within 4 days. So, do you think that is quality? Absolutely not. So, that is just by the way. Now, coming to the quality of sources. Most references cited in quality literature review are primary sources that are peer reviewed. They are primary sources that are peer reviewed. And when you ask me, what is a primary source? A primary source is written by the person who originated or is responsible for generating the ideas published. A research report written by a researcher who conducted the study itself is the primary source. A theorist, for example, a theorist's development of a theory or their conceptual framework, when they publish it, it's a primary source because you are hearing it from the horse's mouth. I do a research now and I publish it and send it to you guys. When you are reviewing it, you are reviewing a primary source. But when you are quoting somebody else, or when you are reviewing a research of somebody else who had already quoted somebody else, that becomes a secondary source. Because a secondary source will summarize or quote the content from a primary source. Most times, authors of secondary sources will paraphrase the work of the researchers or the theories and then present their own personal interpretation of what was written by the primary author. Unfortunately, as a result, information in the secondary source may be misinterpreted or will represent a misinterpretation of the primary author's thought. For example, you may do a research now, and while I was reviewing it, I may misunderstand it. Maybe for some reason, maybe I was hungry when I was doing it. I didn't really understand the direction of the data, and I will conclude in the opposite. Now, when I conclude in the opposite and publish that work, somebody else will look at the work I publish and make reference to it and publish again. And before you know it, you're already carrying a false interpretation of data. That's why we always want to locate the primary source. Secondary sources are usually used, they're only used if the primary sources cannot be located. When you are doing a literature review, try as much as possible to make use of primary sources so that you can know that you are getting authentic data. Okay? But if you cannot get the primary source of a particular content or context, you can make use of a secondary source. Or if the secondary source provides a creative idea or a unique organization of the information that you cannot find in the primary source. All right, next measure of quality is that the paper or the source has to be peer reviewed. I'm sure we all know what a peer review research means. It means that the author of the research report has submitted the manuscript to a publication editor. Now, the publication editor will identify researchers or scholars who are familiar with that particular topic to review the manuscript. Now, these scholars that have been identified by the editor will provide their personal input to the editor about whether the manuscript is okay, if it is accurate, if it meets the standard for quality, or if it is even appropriate for that particular journal. So when the peer review is completed, they return the report to the editor, and the editor will share it with the author. Now, sometimes, personally, my papers have been rejected multiple times, countless of times. And when they are rejected, I know when I started early, I felt bad. But now when it is rejected, I see it as part of the game. What I do is I take their comment, revise the paper based on their comment, modify it, and then look for another journal that suits that particular content, and then send it to that place. Sometimes they also reject it there for so many reasons. Maybe it does not match the scope of the journal or whatever reason. And when they return it, I make sure I improve the quality until it is finally accepted. Now, when it is finally accepted, at least to an extent, there is a proof that it has met certain quality criteria. All right. And this is why I encourage everybody to run away from predatory journals, because when we publish in predatory journals, it does not show that the sources are the material is of quality, at least to an extent. Even though your research may be perfect, but there is no evidence that it underwent a rigorous review process. Okay. Now, quality literature reviews should also include relevant and current sources. Now, what does relevant source mean? Can somebody tell me what relevant source means? Just unmute and say, what does it mean for your source of literature to be relevant? If possible, provide a context. I don't want to call names, but I'm a teacher, so I can call name. I'm allowed to call names if you give me the reason to. Okay. Ajide Oluwakemi. Ajide Oluwakemi, if you're on this call and you are active, you are participating, could you tell me what a relevant source means? Now, this is how I know those who just on their Zoom and disappeared. Okay, Jonathan Yusuf, let me hear your view. What does it mean for a source to be relevant? Yeah, you can unmute. Jonathan,
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
good afternoon.
Thank you. A relevant source, it means the source has direct bearing to the subject in question. The subject that you are working on, the relevant source has direct bearing to it.
Okay,
Thank you,
can you
sir.
give me an example of what just a context or what's relevant? Yeah, that's your explanation is perfect, but give me an example.
Okay, for example, you are probably working on stress, fatigue. For
Okay,
example, in nurses in a particular hospital.
okay,
So your source of literature review has to do with information that has direct bearing on fatigue and stress on
okay,
nurses.
perfect.
Yes, sir.
That is correct. That is correct. Now to throw more, you can mute now. Thank you so much. Throw more context to it. If your research is on fatigue among children, if your research is on fatigue among children who have cancer, for example, I'm sorry, I'm also not apologetic. I'll be making reference to cancer throughout this class because that is the area I've actually immersed myself into. All right. So literature review should be specific to fatigue among children with cancer. Now, even though you are working on fatigue, you can't do fatigue among the general population, even though it's still under fatigue, but that is not relevant. You can't do fatigue among pregnant women because it's not relevant. What is relevant is fatigue among children with cancer, not children with malaria. So your literature review should be specific. Now, sometimes you are allowed to make, to give a context. For example, if you are talking about cancer, you could do literature review on how non-communicable diseases impact children generally. That is allowed. Okay? But then it has to you have to narrow it down to the particular context of your research. Now, literature review should also be, the sources should also be current. When we say current, it means the studies that are published within 5 years before 5 years before your own current literature review. For example, this is 2024. Your reviews should be related to, should not be more than 5 years back. 5 years back would be, this is 2004, would be 2019. This is 2024. That would be 2019. However, some problems have been studied for decades. And literature review often may include some seminal work or landmark studies that were conducted years ago. So it is still allowed to cite some work that are considered seminal when they are more than 5 years back. But when you are dealing with empirical researches, you should always make sure that they are current and published within 5 years. Now, what are seminal studies? Seminal studies are those studies that were the first published in a particular topic that typically signaled the beginning of a new way of thinking on that particular topic, and sometimes they are referred to as classic research. We have a lot of seminal studies that we use in nursing. For example, when we talk about novice to expert, who comes to your mind? When we hear about novice to experts, who comes to your mind? Ajide Oluwakemi, I called you earlier. You are not. You didn't respond. Now you are muted, disturbing us. Can you mute your microphone, please? All right, thank you. Now, when you hear novice to experts in nursing, who comes to your mind?
Benner.
Patricia Benner. Now, it was a seminal work. She was the one that developed that idea of starting everybody will become a novice before they move to advanced beginners until they become experts. Now, if your work is related to how people transition from being a novice to an expert in nursing or in clinical practice, then you may cite Patricia Benner's work. It's a seminal work, but then the reference will be 1990 something, which may be more than 10 years back. But it is allowed to include those. But you have to contextualize these sources. Oftentimes, when I see people say, oh, all your references should be 5 years back, that is correct. But then it depends on the situation. So it is also allowed to have some work that are dated back if you are writing on philosophy or theoretical background or using a seminal work to back your research. There are also landmark researches, studies. These are significant research projects that have been generated over the years to develop knowledge, and this knowledge would influence the discipline and sometimes would influence the entire society. A classical example I can give regarding to landmark studies is Maslow's hierarchy of need. Maslow's hierarchy of need is a landmark study, a landmark work that has been published many years back, but even up till today, it is still relevant. Maslow's hierarchy of need have been used to generate new theories, have been used to generate a lot of researches. So it is still important that when you are talking about how our needs transcend, how our needs go from the basic needs to until we get to self actualization or even the transcendence now that it has been updated. Now, we may reference Maslow's hierarchy of need, and that may date back to, I'm not sure of the exact year, but that's many years back. Now, if we are talking about science of unitary human beings, science of unitary human beings, how human beings they operate in waves. They are always interacting within themselves and the external environment. And then how we emit energy from the environment and also to the environment. We are referring to who is the author of the science of unitary human beings, by the way? Who is the author of science of unitary human beings? Who remembers?
It
See,
is Imogen King.
no, no,
Ah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Another try. Somebody else.
Unitary. Imogen. What of Newman?
It's
No,
Rogers, sir.
yeah, it's
Martha
Martha
Rogers.
It's Martha
Rogers.
Rogers. Martha Rogers.
Absolutely, it's Martha
Martha
Rogers.
Rogers.
Yeah. What about the human becoming theory of human becoming? Who propounded that theory? Hey, nursing postgraduate student, you have to be knowledgeable about our the people who developed knowledge in our profession. You can't be doing literature review without having a theoretical or conceptual framework.
It's Rosemary Rizzo.
Yeah, Rosemary Passé. Rosemary Rizzo Passé. Yeah. So, what about when we talk about caritative process in nursing? Caritative. Somebody who said that while the medical professionals, while they claim that they cure, nurses care. So if there's something called curative, there should also be something called curative. So who
Jane
propounded
Watson.
it? Jane Watson, absolutely. Now, these are landmark studies that have influenced nursing and are also influencing the entire society. So when you are referencing this work, they are likely going to be old. Okay? Now, these studies are frequently replicated to serve as the basis for the generation of additional studies. Human becoming theory have generated a lot of new research, and I love her theory. If you read Rosemary Passé's theory of human becoming, it's very complex, but then it also makes sense. Another theory I love is Margaret Newman's theory. Who can tell me the theory of Margaret Newman? Okay. I know this is not a theory class, but we can't do research without theory because theory with research is what makes the science of nursing. There is nothing like a theoretical nursing. So if you call yourself a nurse scientist, that science is a product of the combination of theory and research. That is what makes us the scientists. So you can't do without theories. So what is the theory of Martha Rogers? A theory is of
Science of
health.
unitary human beings.
Sorry, not Martha Rogers. I'm talking about Margaret Newman. Sorry. Margaret Newman talked about
What about the holistic patient?
yeah, it's a holistic patient, but what is the title of her theory? Health as
Theory of
expanding
Theory of health
consciousness.
as expanding consciousness.
Yeah, health as expanding consciousness. Yeah, that talks about how we live life in waves. There are patterns. Yeah, there are patterns of two conflicting or contradictory waves. Not just moving from either health or other illness or wellness, but we are always oscillating within the frame. Okay, one can be ill today, and that person can still reflect quality of life even while they are ill. Okay, so health is not measured by absence of illness, according to Margaret Newman's Health as Expanding Consciousness. Anyways, so when you are citing this work, they are going to be older studies. Therefore, citing a few older studies that are significant to the development of knowledge on that particular topic is appropriate. However, most publications cited should be current. I'm sure I've made my point clear regarding this. Now, there could also be replication studies. I told you most times the landmark studies are often replicated, and when they are replicated later on, maybe like 5 or 10 years later on. Now, these are production or repetition of a study that researchers often conduct to determine whether the findings of the original study could be found consistent in different settings or with different study participants. Most times, our replication studies are important in order for us to build the evidence for a particular practice. Now, a replication study that supports the finding of the original study would increase the credibility of the findings of the original findings and often strengthens the evidence for practice. However, when a replication study does not support the original study finding, then a question is raised about the credibility of that finding. So if I do a research now, and maybe 5 years later, somebody else replicates it and they found consistency. Now, my research is going to be quality source because it has been shown to be reliable, be credible over time. So when we do replication studies, we always want to see if it correlates with the original study. If it does, then that replication study is a quality source also, because it is still measuring the same thing that had been measured a few years back. We have some studies that have found, some of these Maslow's hierarchy of need to be consistent. That even when we do emergency care now, we are doing ABC airway, breathing, circulation. It's also based on Maslow's hierarchy of need. When we do so many things that we do in nursing, they are based on Maslow's hierarchy of need. We deal with the physiologic pattern before we even move to other needs of the patient. So we found them to be consistent, to be reliable, and we can always cite them. All right. Now, the next thing we are going to talk about, I don't know what's going on. Just give me a second. I have to pause this and fix this slide issue. I'm sorry. Okay.
All right, sir. All right, sir.
Okay, sir.
Recording. All right. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry.
Now recording.
Yeah. So, thank you for calling my attention to that. So, in the first, while you are starting the literature review, you have to prepare. And while preparing, you have to clarify the purpose of the literature and also, determine why you are doing the literature. What is the problem? You can consult the librarian or your supervisor or whoever, or your committee members. I'm not sure we use committee in Nigeria, but whoever is maybe your HOD or whoever is knowledgeable on that particular topic. Now, you go to the next level, which is to select the electronic database. Sorry, I had to recap so that we can also capture it in the video. Yeah. So we'll select the database. Generally, we usually search. Now, let me ask us a question. If I say search for a particular topic, where would you go first? Where would you go first to search for a particular topic? Let's say time toxicity in cancer care. What would you do first? Where would you go to search for that topic? Just tell me.
I usually go to PubMed.
Okay, PubMed. Okay. Who else?
Google Scholar, sir.
Google. Where else?
Google Scholar.
Google Scholar.
Google
What
Scholar.
again? What again? People just type it. People just type it in Google. Most times they type in Google time toxicity and it brings out so many articles on time toxicity. Then some will go to Google Scholar, some will even go to Yahoo. Now, the reason these search engines will identify scholarly publications. Absolutely. To identify many scholarly publications, but may include sources that are not reliable. I have reviewed so many people's Google Scholar accounts, and I see a lot of jargons, a lot of rubbish that people upload in Google Scholar. Now, Google Scholar has good, reliable sources, but it also has unreliable sources. Just upload anything, let it be on the internet, Google Scholar will capture it. So it is not reliable. Google itself, it's everything. Everything, it's Google say everything that is available to give it to you, and that can be very disturbing. Sources obtained from a general search engine should be assessed for quality, such as evidence of peer review. And that's why you need to know what is a reliable source and what is not a reliable source. Now, when I look at an article, I look at just because I've been used to it over the years, I already know what a reliable source is. I'll look at it, I'll say, no, discount this. When you see journals that are, for example, journals, International Journal of Nursing, Midwifery, Engineering, Social Science, and Public Health. This is a bogus journal and cannot give me what I want. How can one journal capture nursing, science, engineering, midwifery, public health, and technology? International Journal of Technology and Science, and people are publishing in those journals? Don't worry, very soon I'll start calling out. No matter who you are, I will call you out and say you are the ones putting a dent on nursing scholarship. So I'm encouraging everybody to get use of what a peer-reviewed journal looks like. What at least we will know that a journal that are published by societies, journals that are published by any academic institution, even though it may not always be like that, because I don't want to mention name, because I've seen so many journals published by our universities in Nigeria that are jargons. I've seen so many journals and I see articles and I say, was this article published in this academic journal? So we need to be open. Let us not be focused on quantity, but be more particular about quality. Now, it may be difficult to publish initially, but then by the time you continue to advance yourself, you see that it's no longer a big deal. Now I write paper and I know, okay, this paper is going to this journal. And once I contact the journal, read their requirement, format my paper, and it goes. Nowadays, I get just little rejections. Okay, writing paper is no longer a big deal because I've trained myself. I've been used to it over the years. It was not like that when I started. Now, why I'm saying this is that we have to understand what an authentic source of literature is. Now, if you do your literature review and your sources are not reliable, then that effort is a waste. Now, additionally, the sources you identify from a general search engine may not be the most current sources. It may not be able to screen, it has to be within 5 years or it has to be within 2 years. They are not reliable because they may not be current, they may not be peer reviewed, they may not be even directed towards what you are searching for. Now, to find current literature, you need to learn to use computerized bibliographic databases, such as the CINAHL, the Science Direct. These are valuable tools that you can easily use to search for relevant empirical or theoretical literature. However, different databases contain citations for articles from different disciplines. So you have to focus on the database that is related to nursing. I may show you some of the databases I use when searching later on. Now, I'm going to flip to the next slide, then I will return back to this slide later. This is examples of the database that I use. I have PubMed, CINAHL, ProQuest, Cochrane Library, Embase, Scopus, Web of Science, Ovid Nursing, this is by Lippincott. They're the ones that do this Ovid Nursing database. PsychoInfo has a little bit of nursing, especially when you're dealing with psycho-oncology. Yeah, the up-to-date Medline, Health Science Nursing, and then Nursing Reference Center. So these are databases that are available to us, that are available, although some of them cost a lot of money to subscribe to. Yeah, but then if you are doing a research work and you are being funded, then it's always good to get an affiliation with any of these databases. It will help you to get reliable literature. All right. Now, we have prepared enough. We've identified and selected the database and the search term that we're going to use. Now we are ready to conduct the search itself. We've talked about the next slide that I'm going to show us is going to include electronic databases. It's going to include search table that we are going to use, but that will be in the second, on the fourth point. Now, searching the database using the selected keywords is very vital. It's very vital because you have to make sure that your search is going to follow the framework that you've already identified. Remember, at the second step, you are selecting the database and also selecting the search terms you are going to use. So you can narrow the number of articles and retrieve fewer publications, but you have to make sure that these search terms are going to give you relevant articles. And that's why you have to make use of keywords. We've talked about keywords previously. They are terms that serve as labels for publications on a particular topic. For example, if I'm doing a quasi-experimental study that focuses on maybe providing text messages reminder to patients living with heart failure who are taking 5 or more medications, we may find this type of research by using keywords such as maybe electronic communication, instant messaging, medication adherence, patient teaching, quasi-experimental design, and heart failure. All right. So these are keywords that surround that topic that I'm researching. Now, when you find one article on that particular topic, you have to look under the abstract. Most articles will have abstracts. Okay. Now, when you look under the abstract, you will see that they have search terms or what they call keywords. Now, using these search terms or the keywords is actually a skill that you need to teach yourself. But also remember that you can always consult somebody to help you. You can't be a jack of all trades. You can't know everything. Now, consulting a librarian may save you the time and make the search more easy for you or more effective. That is if you have a skilled librarian that can help you, or consult anybody. Now, you can have colleagues in other places. It's also allowed because it's about knowledge. You can have colleagues in other places. They can help you. I know some institutions have restrictions, but where there are no restrictions in institutional policy, you can consult them and they can help you do those search terms, or you collaborate with them. That is how we encourage collaboration in nursing. All right. Now, conducting the search, the actual search of the database may be the easiest step within the process of literature review. One method that we've talked about is to use multiple databases simultaneously. Now, if I'm using EBSCOhost, you can be also using Google's, I don't want to use the word Google Scholar. You can be using Science Direct or something and search them simultaneously. This will avoid duplicating your work or your efforts, and also you have to keep a list of searches that you have completed so that you won't be going back and forth. Now, this is especially important if you have limited time and we will be searching in several short sessions instead of a long one. So when you do multiple searches at the same time, and then you gather the resources, you keep a record of the searches that you've done so that you don't go back to search for them again. After a short period of time, you should be able to get adequate, it's just like if it's going to take one person to clean a house for 5 hours, How many hours will it take 5 person? It's going to be 1 hour. So it's going to make your work to be shorter because you are searching multiple databases simultaneously. All right. Then the next one is to use a table to document the results of your search. Now, as you search, you have to document it so that you don't search again on that particular paper, or when you see it, you already know that you've researched it already. A very simple way to document your search is to use a table. One on the table, you record the search term that you used, the time frame you used, and then the results that emerged from that search. Now, nowadays, most electronic databases, you can sign up for an account and keep your search history online. For example, we have the RefWorks, the EndNote, the Zotero. I don't know if anybody has used any of these three: RefWorks, EndNote, or Zotero. They are very good resources that can track your references. Even when you download articles, they already generate references from those articles. So you don't even have to track it. Now, we'll talk about the references. If at the end of the day, if you are changing from APA to MLA or to Vancouver or whatever, you can always change your citation pattern and to modify everything simultaneously. However, remember, these are computers. They also make mistakes. So you also have to review it yourself. However, they also make work very easy and seamless when you are doing literature search. Now, you can use reference management software to conduct searches and store the information on all search fields for each reference you have obtained in the search. Now, within the software, you can store articles in folders with other similar articles. For example, you may have a folder for, let's say, theory sources. You are doing an ethnography or ethno-nursing, you have a folder for theoretical perspective, because ethno-nursing also talks about caring, how caring is the core of nursing. And you know, Jen Watson has also talked about caring. So any theoretical paper, you can store it in one folder within the software. Then another one for methodological sources. Let's say ethnography, you look for, or ethno-nursing, you look for researchers that have done ethno-nursing using that method. So all those results will be stored in a different folder. And then maybe the last one will be on findings that you want to include. So this will help to organize your search and your results. Now, as you read the articles, you can also insert some comments into the reference file about each one. Then you have to export each search result from the bibliography database to your reference management software so that it will help to cite the information that you have actually determined. That will be, I think you guys will be doing systematic review shortly if you have not done it. So that should be able to cover it, because when you're doing systematic review, it's going to be systematic. You are going to do it and document everything you have done, right from the first time you search the keywords, how many literature came out, then when you screened, how many remained, then when you check for eligibility, how many remained, and then what's the final key, database, or what's the final number of articles you are using for your systematic review or integrative review or whatever. Okay, so you have to use a table to document the result. Now, if you look at the paper I sent to you yesterday on time toxicity, it was actually a concept analysis, but it involved literature search or literature review to an extent. But it was basically to develop and generate meaning on what it means, what time toxicity in cancer care means. Because when I did the initial search, there was no literature in nursing that talked about time toxicity. It actually came from when I was researching about financial toxicity. Now, I said if there could be financial toxicity, which means the patients with cancer are facing financial hardship. Now, there's also a concept that we've not really talked about: the time that patients really, consume, the time they spend in cancer-related diagnosis, treatment, follow-up, everything. You know, when somebody is diagnosed with cancer now, their life is surrounded about around that cancer. They forgo Christmas, forgo Ileya, forgo anything because they have cancer. Even on Christmas Day, they are all seeking treatment or looking for a solution. So there is really time toxicity, but it's not being spoken about. And that was how I came up with that concept. Now, if you look at that paper, you see that I have a table. Although that table has been edited to suit the journal guideline, but the table generally will contain the information of all my searches regarding that particular topic. Now, after you've documented your search results on a table, the next thing you have to do is to refine your search. A search may identify thousands of references, many more than you can actually read or even include in your literature. So you have to open a few articles that you have identified and see what key terms were used in these articles. Then, because there are too many, you have to reconsider the topic and determine how you can narrow your search. One strategy is to decrease the range of years. Now, if your search was 10 years, you can actually decrease it to 5 years. Okay? Some electronic databases will allow you to limit the search, the type of articles you are searching. Some will be scholarly, peer-reviewed articles, or theoretical. So you can also limit it to a particular type of article that you are searching. That is depending on the type or the amount of results you get originally. If your result is scanty, you can actually expand it a little bit so that you can get a broader scope pertaining to that result. Now, combining terms or searching for the terms only in the abstract will decrease the number of articles identified. For undergraduate research assignments, it may be appropriate to limit the search to only full text articles because you often specify do review on five papers. So that 5 papers should only be full text. But for graduate students or postgraduate students, we always try to avoid limiting the search to full text articles because doing so, this might result in missing sources that are needed for that particular paper. Now, narrowing the search, please remember you can ask questions at any time. Raise your hand if you need a clarification on a particular area. Okay? Narrowing the search tightly, if it's too tight, maybe you make it too close so that you can get very accurate data, you can actually end up with too few results. And when that occurs, you can actually retry again, widen it a little bit more until all the limitations are removed. Okay, so we've talked about selecting the database, the use of tables, and then refining your search. Now, the next thing is to review the abstract to identify relevant studies. We've defined what a relevant study is about previously. The abstract provides pertinent information about any article. You can easily determine if the article is a research report, a description of a clinical problem, or a theoretical article. For example, concept analysis. If you read the work I did before, you see by looking at the title alone, you will know that it's a concept analysis. It does not involve an original data. Now, you will now identify the articles that seem to be the most relevant to your topic and the purpose of the review. Because if you have 1,000 papers that you have retrieved, you cannot read all of them from A to Z to determine if they are relevant. Most times, you will look at the abstract to see, maybe this will be relevant to my work. Okay, then you keep it. But there are some abstracts you will see and you say, oh, no, this is not even relating to what I'm doing. Some people use catchy titles in their research. And these catchy titles can deceive the database and will pop up in unrelated researches. So when you look at their abstracts, it will be easy for you to see that that work is not pertinent or not related to your study. Okay. If looking for evidence on which of the articles to base your clinical practice, you can actually identify the research report and select those that are conducted in settings that are similar to your setting. If you are doing a research on tertiary institution, you can look for articles that their settings are within tertiary institution. If it's a community setting, if it's an outpatient setting, you have to look at those settings that are similar to your own setting. Now, if you are writing a literature review for a course assignment, Then you will review the abstract to identify the different types of information that are contained. For example, you may need information on, let's say, mortality or morbidity, as well as the description of treatment available for a particular disease. Now, you mark the abstracts of the relevant studies or save them within the electronic folder that we've described earlier. As you are doing this, you are now reviewing the abstracts, removing the unrelated papers, and then keeping the related ones. Now, after you have reviewed the abstracts and the ones and kept the ones that are related and you've deleted the ones that are not related, you now go further to obtain the full text copies of all the relevant articles. Remember, initially it was abstract that we were looking at just to screen. But then because they were, you did not screen them out during the abstract selection does not mean they are fully relevant. So using the abstract of relevant articles, you will retrieve and save the electronic files of full text articles on your computer in order to, so that you can review them more thoroughly later. You may want to rename the electronic file using maybe the name of the first author's maybe last name and the year and the file name with a descriptive phrase. Maybe Wozichi 2004 time toxicity. Okay, that will make you know whenever you see that particular article, you will know what it's talking about and you can review it in more detail. For articles not available as full text online, you can search your library's holding. We've talked about this already. To determine if the journal is available to you in print form. Sometimes if the journal is not available online, you can go to your library where you have nothing journals. You can check whether they are in print form. But still the same thing. I don't know how many of our libraries actually have a lot of journals. Anyways, now if you prefer reading print materials or electronic materials, you may choose to print the articles directly. You can print them directly, and then, because me personally, sometimes I also love to read hard copies. So if, depending on what you love to read, before electronic databases came up, people were printing all the literature and they'll be highlighting it one after the other to review. But depending on what works for you, I love paper. I love to read papers, even though I have the soft copies too. Now, it is important to obtain the full text of the article because the abstract does not include the details that you need for that literature review. The abstract will not tell you the methodological processes. It will just summarize it to not tell you what was done first, second, and third, in case you want to replicate it. So it's important, even though you use the abstract to screen, but the full texts are very important. Now, the next step is to ensure that the information needed to cite the source is recorded. Now, as you retrieve and save the articles, note if the article includes all the information needed for the citation. It's very, very important because if you get a paper that looks very interesting, it has happened to me many times. This paper is very interesting, but you look at it, there is no citation, there's no referencing information or bibliographic information. It becomes a problem. Now, the bibliographic information on the source should be recorded in a systematic manner according to the format that you are using, maybe APA or MLA or whatever format. Most times we make use of APA. Now we have the APA 7. The purpose of carefully citing these sources is that the reader can retrieve the reference for themselves later on. You can confirm your own personal interpretation of the findings and then gather additional information on that topic. So it is important to account for every article that you are downloading because before you start reviewing, make sure that they have the bibliographic information needed. Now, for each reference, you will need the author's name, year of publication, the article title, the journal name, the journal volume, and issue. And sometimes nowadays, they are also including the DOI, even though DOI is not is not compulsory, but it's encouraged. Now, if a book chapter has been photocopied or retrieved electronically, you have to ensure that the publisher's name, location, and the year of publication is recorded because APA will require that you include the publisher's name, maybe Wiley and Sons or Springer's publisher. Then you have to include their location and the year of publication. These are very vital, especially for book chapters. If it's an edited chapter, you also have to make sure that the author of that chapter and then the editors of that book, you will have their names. Now, if you are using electronic a personal bibliography software such as RefWork, the software records the citation information for you automatically. But if it's a predatory journal, some of this information may not be available. So RefWork will not generate bibliographic information. So you have to screen that out on your own. Now, the next is processing the literature. Processing the literature, that is, you have obtained the article, you've screened them, you've made sure that they have their bibliographic information. You have to process the literature because this process is among the most difficult phase of literature review. This section includes reading the articles, appraising the article, analyzing it, and synthesizing the literature. Okay, so under it, you have to read the articles. As you look at the stack of printed articles, or if you are scanning through the electronic copies of several articles, you may be asking yourself, am I expected to read every word of the available sources? The answer is absolutely no. Of course, reading every word of every source will result in you being well-read and knowledgeable about that topic, but with no limited time available for you to prepare the manuscript, prepare other things, collect your data, and you need to defend. So it is not compulsory or mandatory that you read everything word for word. Now, with the availability of full text online, we have articles that are full text. You can easily forget the focus of the review if you are writing or reading everything word for word. Now, you need to become skilled in reviewing literature because you have to find a balance between learning to identify the most pertinent information and making sure that the information is relevant to your work. Okay. On the other hand, you can actually you cannot critically appraise or synthesize what you do not read. So you also have, even though you don't want to read everything word for word, you also need to have enough knowledge of that material. So when you look at the work, you need to learn what is normally included in different sections of the article. In background, what are you looking for in the background of the article? Is the background giving you the information you need? What about the method? Does it fully describe how the sampling was done? Does it fully describe the interventions? If there was need for randomization, does it fully describe what you are looking for? Now, the result. What are the results coming? Or what is the result saying? Does it address the author's objective? And now, are the results conflicting? Are there conflicting information in the result? What is the direction of the result? And at the end of the day, you need to read these things carefully and make sure that you are extracting information from each of these sections. Now, comprehending and critically appraising sources often lead to an understanding of the current state of knowledge relating to a research problem. Although you may have to skim or read selected sections of your references that you have found, because you will need to make sure that the articles are relevant and you have also not read it before. You have to make sure that there are no duplication in the process. Now, comprehending a source begins by reading and focusing on understanding the main points of that article. You may highlight the content that you consider important, or you may make notes on the margins. If you are using a computer or a PDF, you can make notes on the margins. Now, the type of information you highlight or note in the margin depends on the type of study or source. Now, with theoretical article, you may want to make note of maybe the concepts, the definitions, or relationship among the concepts. Let's say for King's goal attainment theory. King's goal attainment theory talked about the patient and the nurse, and how the nurse comes with their own perception, their own action and impression, and the patient comes with his or her own. The two will result to an action. The action will result into a reaction. Reaction will result into interaction. Interaction will result into transaction, and eventually the transaction result into goal attainment. Now, if you read a paper that references or that talks about goal attainment, you may want to document the definitions of those concepts, how they are interrelated, and then you try to make connection among those things while you are documenting on the margin. However, for research articles, you may want to write the research problem, the purpose, the framework that were used, the major variables that are contained within that research article, maybe the study design and the sample size, measurement, data collection, analysis technique, and then the results and findings. These are the areas that we are usually concerned about when it comes to research article. You may also wish to record quotes and include page numbers that might be used in reviewing your literature section. Now, the decision to paraphrase these quotes can be made later on, okay? But at the initial stage, you can just note down those quotes and the page number, so that while you are synthesizing your work, you can make reference to that quote and go back to it because you've noted the page number within the article. And also, you need to remember that you have to make note about what you think about the article, your own reflection, such as how the content fits within your own research and how it can foster the attainment of your own research objective. These are going to be noted. All right. Now, the next step is to appraise, analyze, and synthesize the literature. Analysis requires you to determine the value of a reference that you make the decision about what information to include in the review. Now, when you're analyzing, it actually starts during the search. Analysis starts during the search. Okay, you analyze and determine whether this particular source is valuable and what makes it valuable. First, you need to appraise the individual study critically. To critically appraise the study, you need to identify relevant content in the article and make a valuable judgment about the validity or the credibility of these findings. However, the critical appraisal of individual study is only the first step in developing an adequate review of literature. Now, remember when you are getting I told you that as you are downloading the paper, you are scrutinizing them, you are reviewing the abstracts, you're already making some judgments about it. So analysis generally requires manipulation of what you are finding, literally making it your own. You are going to internalize your finding. If you are using a reference manager software, well, it may allow you to generate summary table from the information that are recorded within each study. Now, as you continue to analyze the literature that you have found, you will make comparisons among other studies. And this is where we see a difference between annotated bibliography and summary of literature table. Okay, we'll talk about that shortly later on. So when you are doing a literature review and you're analyzing, while you have synthesized one particular study, you also have to link it. You have to link it and compare it with your own study and also compare with other studies, so that it won't just be every paragraph for one study, because that's what some people do. In a literature review, you see one paragraph, Adekunle et al. Found that this is happened. The second paragraph, Ishola et al. Found that this is happened in the other paragraph. So this is not literature review, it's mere annotated bibliography. In literature review, in real literature review, you have to connect. Okay, while Ishola found that pregnant women are liable to maybe hypertension, Adekunle also realized that beyond this risk factor, people who are of a particular region are even more liable or even more predisposed. Now you see how the connection has been established from pregnant women being predisposed to hypertension, but then Adekunle has also supported the previous one, but gave a different context. That is how your table summary should look like. Okay? You look for connections, similarities, and themes in the literature. That is what analysis is all about. And this will allow you to appraise the existing body of knowledge critically in relation to your own research problem. Now, you may want to record the theories and methods that have been used to the study or to address the problem and maybe any flaws that you think has existed. And that's why even most research now, we encourage everybody, you analyze your own work, give us the limitations so that when people are reviewing it, they already know the limitations that can affect the generalizability of the research. Now, you will begin to work towards summarizing what you have found by describing what is known and not known about that particular problem. And that is appraisal and analysis. Now, the synthesis actually involves thinking deeply about what you have found and identified, the main themes that have emerged. Now, through this synthesis, you will cluster and describe the connections among the information that you have found. Now, from this cluster of information, you can now begin to draw some conclusions about what is now known. Remember, you started from the unknown. Now you are beginning to know something about that particular area. You will make some initial conclusion. Then you can continue to make even additional connections to the topic that you are examining. Any literature review that simply appraises individual study paragraphs from paragraph to another paragraph is inadequate. So when you are doing your literature review, please avoid the temptation of just making every paragraph a one study. Some people just copy abstracts and put them as paragraph and then another abstract as paragraph. That is not a literature review. That is just downloading abstracts. But when you are doing literature review, there has to be a synthesis among all you have been able to identify. So there has to be a connection among your literature. A good literature review synthesizes what is known and unknown by integrating similar findings from sources rather than just providing unlinked individual article summaries. Now, one strategy that you can use to synthesize is to review the table or your conceptual map. Yeah, because I also love to do conceptual maps. You review the table or the conceptual map that you have developed, and then make a list of findings that are similar and those that are different, so that you'll be able to connect the contrasting studies and also connect the similar studies. For example, let's say you have read example is interventions on let's say end of life care of children with leukemia, just for an example. Now, as you review your notes, you notice that 4 studies out of the 5 that you have identified, 4 of them were conducted in an outpatient setting with samples of children from, let's say, age 7 to 10. And then all these studies had statistically significant results with a particular intervention. Now, the remaining 1 study had a non-significant result, but also used the same intervention, but was set in the setting was in an inpatient setting. And then the sample was, let's say, younger people who are younger than 5 years or younger than 7 years, rather. Now, the main idea that you identify may be that the effectiveness of this intervention can vary depending on the setting and age of the child. Because those that had similar setting had similar results, and the one that had a different setting had a different result. And your conclusion will be intervention, even though it works, but it also depends on the setting where the intervention is being implemented. Another strategy is to talk about the article you have reviewed with another student or another nurse or a friend. You verbalize the characteristics of the studies and explain to them, what you think differently about the study. Okay. Now, while you are explaining to them, you are enhancing your thinking skills, which may actually aid you or promote you to identify the main ideas or conclusion within that particular article. So summarily, this is how we can appraise, analyze, and then synthesize the literature. Now, after we've done this, the next thing we need to do is to write the review of the literature, which is about the final part. Now, talking about the main ideas of the review can prepare you for the final steps of writing the literature review. Step 11, which is developing an outline to organize information from the review, will help you to to make sure that you are on track. You are not just jumping from up and down. Okay? Now, before beginning to write your review, you must develop an outline based on your synthesis of what you have read, using the sections of the review as a major headings in the outline. Well, it actually depends on the purpose of the literature review. You have to determine what the major sections of the paper will look like. Frequently, a comprehensive literature review has 4 sections. We have the introduction, the discussion of theoretical literature, and then the discussion of empirical literature, and then the summary. Now, under the major headings of the outline, you need to make notes about which source you want to mention in the different section. Because, for example, if you have downloaded articles, one of the sections of the article, you say, oh, this will be good for introduction. Oh, this will be good for the discussion area. This will be good for my summary. Because at the end of the day, while you're writing, you will now make reference to those annotations you've made in order to be able to synthesize your paper well so that they can have an organized direction. The introduction will include the focus of the purpose of the review and will often present the organizational structure of that review. In the introduction section, you will make clear what you will and will not be covering. The discussion section may be divided into the theoretical and empirical subsection, which I've already talked about previously. And then your themes will also be divided based on this area. For example, a theoretical section might include the concept analysis, the model theories, or conceptual framework within that paper that you have downloaded. Now, the empirical, which always has to do with data. If you have a separate section for the empirical, will include the research findings from studies that you have reviewed. And that's why some people will say when you're doing literature review, you do the theoretical or the conceptual review, and then you do the empirical review. Okay, it's always good to streamline it because when you're doing a review, you can give us a concept of what that particular intervention is talking about, how that relates to different aspects of depending on the context of the research you're doing. And then later on, the empirical review can tell us, okay, while I'm talking about this intervention, Adekunle in 2025 or 2024 found out that this intervention was effective, but it was among younger children. Whereas Ojo in 2024 had already found that even though the intervention was effective, there was a combination of both adults and children. Now, for these two research, there was a consistency in the effectiveness of this intervention. However, the population, the characteristics of their sample differed. Now, you see how I've been able to synthesize the two research, okay? And then I've been able to, organize them so that I will understand what should come at the introduction, what should come at the conceptual or theoretical section, and then what will come at the empirical. Empirical, I'm giving data. 90% of the people passed, and 80% passed in China, 50% passed in so-so place. These are findings from original articles. Now, also to add to the synthesis, you may also want to incorporate the strength and weakness of the body of knowledge. For example, I may say that an intervention was effective in Bowen University. However, Bowen University, depending on the context, maybe it's fully funded by the government. I'm just using that as an example. I don't know. It's fully funded by the government, so they may have more resources as compared to maybe one university in one village that does not have enough funding. So even though it was effective in Bowen University, there are also other contexts because funding may be additional factor that made it more effective. For example, if I'm reviewing a research on effectiveness of or research on the knowledge of HIV counseling and testing among university students, and I found out that nursing students a medical student had higher knowledge than fine arts students. Now, I'm going to also make that contextualize it, because the the nursing students are also expected. The reason is that they are expected to be knowledgeable in that particular area. So that may be a reason why that finding is skewed. Now, if I go to a technical college that does not have health-related people, their knowledge may be lower. So that may be a limitation, or that may be, you may have to contextualize it so that people will have a better, a clearer view of what you are writing in terms of the literature review. Now, in the summary section of the outline, you have to make note of your own personal conclusion. We know that a conclusion is a statement about the state of knowledge in a related topic, which includes what is known and what is unknown about that particular area. Now, the next thing, sorry, I'm rushing because we have limited time and you also have to do some activities. All right, now the next section, which is the 12th, is to write each section of the review. You start each paragraph with a theme sentence that actually describes the main ideas of that paragraph. You present the relevant studies in each paragraph that support the main ideas stated in the theme sentence. Now, each paragraph has to be ended with a concluding sentence that tends to give it a transitional feel. Each paragraph can be compared with like a train. You know, a train has different, we call it freight cars or coaches. So train has different coaches that are connected. There's something that keeps them connected. And that is how your literature review should be connected. So as you're writing each section, you're always connecting it with another section. Now, avoid using direct quotes from an author. Your analysis and synthesis of the sources will allow you to paraphrase the author's idea. Now, when you are paraphrasing, we know that you are only expressing the idea in your own words. The meanings of these sources are then connected to the proposed study. Now, if the written review is not clear or cohesive, you may need to look at your own personal notes and then ensure that you have synthesized the literature adequately. Now, the defect of a study or body of knowledge need to be described, but you have to maintain a respectful tone and avoid using highly critical languages, because other people will read your work and it will be as if you are damaging other people's work, which has actually helped you to do your own work. So be critical, be realistic, but then use a respectful tone. Okay, so that you don't, be highly critical of somebody else's work. Now, as you near the end of the review, you have to write the summary as a concise presentation of the current knowledge based on the research problem. The finding from the studies will have been logically presented in the previous section, so that when the readers see it, they will also make their own personal conclusion about the gaps that are found in the knowledge base. You will need to conclude with the potential contribution of literature review to the body of knowledge. Now, the 13th one is to create a reference list. Now, you have to check your references. You have to create a reference list, making use of either APA, depending on the guideline you are using. Okay. You have to make use of that, create a reference list. Now, when you've created a reference list, remember, while you are reviewing, you are also documenting your references. And at the end of the day, you have a list of references. Now, you have to go back and check the list of references and make sure that the list of references are complete, that everything you have cited in the literature is corresponding with everything you have listed in the list of literature. Okay? Now, if there is anything that you have listed in the list of literature that you did not cite in the in-text, you have to delete it. Or if there's anything you cited in the in-text that is not in the list of literature, you have to go back and check it again and maybe include it if you skipped it. You can also ask somebody to look at it. Nowadays, everybody is busy, so it's even difficult to get somebody. But if you have established a solid research connection, research group, then it will be easy for people to help each other to advance knowledge. Now, a critical final step is always to compare the literature, the list of literature with what you have cited, and make sure that everything is complete, including the author's name, year of publication, everything matches. Unfortunately, I have seen in several cases, which I have pointed out, people will do literature review because they did not do thorough literature review. They just combined or even plagiarized people's work. And then they will now go, let's say it was cited Mozichi 1998 in the original work. They will now go and change it to Mozichi 2024, so that when the supervisor reads it, it will look recent. And many supervisors are not ready to even go and review the students' list of literature. Please, you should not do that. That is an academic dishonesty, and that can tarnish your career. So make sure you only cite what you have reviewed. Some people review, they'll just, for example, in my work now, I cited Jane Watson. Now, people will not read Jane Watson's work. They only read my work and they'll be citing Jane Watson's. Meanwhile, it's possible I misinterpreted Jane Watson's work, but then they are citing Jane Watson and they did not read Jane Watson's work. So always cite the primary author that you have read. But it's also possible to also make it in such a way that you are citing me or you are citing Jane Watson as cited by me. That will also tell your readers that, okay, you did not read Jane Watson's work, you base work on my own analysis or interpretation of Jane Watson's work. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So we should make sure that everything tallies. And why you know that is, imagine a list of reference in the in-text, it is Mozichi 2024. But in the reference list, it's showing Mozichi 1998. When you see such things, there's a problem. You need to really investigate it. The student or whoever might have actually altered the reference to make it recent. Okay? So let's avoid that by all means. So that is basically what the steps of literature review is talking about. Now, this is the literature summary I mentioned earlier. There are so many methods. It depends on what works for you. But then the literature summary, author, the purpose, the framework, the sample, the measures, if it's available, the treatment. Some may be experimental, some may not be experimental. They'll just be descriptive or whatever, and then the result. You can also make maybe notes on the side of the limitations or your own personal interpretations. Okay. Now, I've showed you this already. These are the databases that we use. This is another database. Now, this is how you cite your APA. I'm going to send the slide to you all so you can read it and also make your own interpretation. This is how you cite your APA 7. However, when you are writing journals, there are different methods. There are some that you only have to write numbers. You assign numbers to them. So they may not really be, it depends on what the literature review is all about. If it's for your project and they say APA 7, you make use of APA 7. If it's AMLA, Medical Language Association or wherever, if it's Vancouver, you make sure you format your work based on that. And this is why using reference managers are very, very, very encouraged, because reference manager will always adjust it based on whichever pattern you want to do. Now, we talked about annotated bibliography, which, even though it is not a real literature review, it is the first step that we usually do. Okay, we just write a general annotation of the bibliography that contains 4 particular steps. It's just a list of each article. They are not connected. You just write them down. Let's say you are told to do a review of 10 articles. You might just do annotated bibliography initially before you now go in depth to do a thorough review, analyze, and synthesize even further. Okay. Now, these are the key components of an annotated bibliography, which we are going to practice now with the remaining time that we have. Okay. Annotated bibliography usually includes a citation, depending on whatever you are using. But for today, we will make use of APA. It will also include summary, which is the main bibliography, the main annotation rather. To include the summary, we include an evaluation, which is a critical appraisal of the source's reliability, validity, and also relevance to your own research. And then your own personal reflection of how the source or how the literature contribute to your understanding or how they support your own argument within the problem that you've identified. These are example. This is the citation. Then the annotation includes the summary. This paper discusses time toxicity in cancer care, highlighting the impact of prolonged treatment duration on patient quality of life. The author conducted a meta-analysis of 15 studies to synthesize current knowledge. This is just an example I've just done. Evaluation, the work is foundational, offering a comprehensive review of the emerging concept of time toxicity. However, it focuses on secondary data, limits new empirical insight. Now, have you seen, even though I did an evaluation, I also included the limitation of that study. So that while I'm discussing, I would also put a context. While I say time toxicity has an impact, a significant impact, but it is on secondary data. I did not do direct data collection to write this. Now, your reflection is this article underpins my conceptual framework for measuring time toxicity and validates the need for developing tools like the time toxicity index. As a matter of fact, this is what I'm working on currently to develop this time toxicity index. These are also other examples that you may start. This is the citation, this is the summary, your evaluation, and then your personal reflection. That is what is included in an annotated bibliography. This is also another example. All right. So I think these are, so yeah. In terms of literature summary, some people will say, are they the same? The literature summary table. Sorry, thought I fixed this. The literature summary table. The literature summary table that I showed you before like we explained earlier, is going to tell you, okay, from this particular paragraph, there has to be a link to the next paragraph and not just the, isolated deposition of different unrelated research. So literature summary looks like an annotated bibliography, but it is interconnected. That is the difference. Okay. This is the format. It has to be in a grid or a table. There has to be a purpose, the focus, and then often used during the synthesis phase of literature so that you can connect one site or one reference to another reference. All right. When do you use the tool? For annotated bibliography, you can use it at the initial phase of literature, but then the literature summary table will be used when you are synthesizing and then trying to identify gaps that exist in the body of knowledge. Now, let's talk a little bit about ethics. Ethics in literature review, the key principles are accuracy. You have to present properly the author's ideas and not just to copy, and there has to be accuracy of idea, which means you have to read the paper well in order to synthesize. Integrity, avoid plagiarism and manipulation. That is where you have the highest level of plagiarism in any written project. The highest level of plagiarism is in literature review. Quote me on that. The second area will be the method section, which that is understandable to an extent because method for phenomenological study will look similar, even though the setting and the phenomenon may be different. If I'm using let's say Mulhouse's method, if I'm using Martin Heidegger's method, it depends on the method I'm using. So the method may be similar, but you have to make sure you avoid plagiarism and manipulation. I've talked about manipulation before, changing date to a recent date so that people would, forget about it and move on. That is an ethical issue. And then acknowledge the original author's idea and notes, write their names down. Acknowledge them, their names and their ideas. Another one is common ethical issues, misrepresentation of data, failure to credit sources, and selective reporting of biased conclusion. You will see that a conclusion is biased, but because it does not match what you are writing, you remove it from your own analysis. That is not how a review is done. A review is done so that you determine what is known and what is not known. So if there's a bias in the paper, you also have to talk about it so that people can have a clearer view of what you are doing. So solution is to use plagiarism detection text and then follow ethical guidelines such as the one by APA and the ones by International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. All right, so these are the referencing styles that we use. Vancouver is the one that has the number style. If number one is Mozichi, in your reference list, number one will be Mozichi. If number two is Adegbite, your number two list will be Adegbite, and everything will be consistent. So whichever one you are using, you have to be consistent based on the instructions you are given. Now, best practices for conducting a literature review, you need to start with the focus of the research, use the systematic strategy that we've described, then maintain a clear and critical perspective. And then you document the search process for transparency and reproducibility sake. Okay? Interactive, these are the actions that we are going to do now. These are the actions we are going to do now. I gave us the articles. Okay. So everybody within the next, I know it's not realistic, but just to have a feel of what it means to do an annotated bibliography. We'll just start with the annotated bibliography. So any of the article you are interested in, within the next 10 to 15 minutes, try to generate a theme. You generate a citation, the summary, evaluation, and reflection. I know this is not adequate time enough, but let us see what we can come up. So I can call on anybody in the next 15 minutes to tell us how to cite it based on APA. We're going to use APA now. I don't know who is in Phoenix X6 something. They are drawing something on my screen. I don't know why. Anyways, so in the next 15 minutes, I'll call maybe one or two people to just quickly tell me what the citation looks like, what their own summary, evaluation, and reflection from any of the two papers I sent to you. So this is the activities for today's class. And then after that, we'll call it a day. All right, I'll call any two persons. So everybody should participate in this, but I'll call anybody, and this may serve as your attendance. If I call you and you're not present, I'll have to inform the program coordinator, the course coordinator, that you are absent. All right. So in the next 15 minutes, my time is 10:25. So 35, 10:40, or I think that should be 3:40 on your own time, or 4:40, I'm not sure. By next 15 minutes, we'll come back again. Thank you. Everybody has to participate. Write them down, and then you have to present if I call you. I don't know who I'm calling back. I can call anybody. All right?
what encourages them to stay is work motivation. And one of the key primary, will I say, movers of work motivation is social support. Then in this study, they also used the model of job demand resource, which was developed by Bakker and Demerotti. And they carried out a cross-sectional study to explore experiences of registered nurses of social support in different healthcare settings. So my evaluation is that they used the quantitative method to identify the nurses who have received social support in different healthcare centers, the primary and primary healthcare centers, hospital settings, and home care for patients. However, if they had added a qualitative aspect to the study, it would have enabled them to allow the registered nurses to describe their experiences of social support rather than just using the quantitative aspect only. Then my reflection is that the article identifies that the different healthcare settings determine how much social support one gets. So for those in the primary healthcare settings, maybe because there is a smaller work group, they were able to get more social support as against those working in the hospital settings who did not have as much work support. However, those who worked in the home healthcare settings did not really get any support as such, and maybe it's because they were just working on their own without not working in peers or in groups. So on that basis, my reflection is that a well-supported nurse can provide the best possible care to a patient, and to get that support will also motivate you to do your work better. So such a nurse will be able to provide the best possible care to patients, whether in the community or at home or in the hospital setting. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely correct. Now, that is an excellent explanation. She included the bibliography, and her bibliography was absolutely correct. The summary was intact, and then she also even made a critical evaluation, including the strengths and weaknesses of the research, including her own impression that they should have actually included a qualitative aspect of the research to get a wider perspective. However, she still went ahead to make a personal reflection of the results that she obtained from that article. Now, if we do not read and evaluate and analyze literature like this, it may be very difficult to be able to do accurate literature review. It's called a literature review, not a literature copy and paste, which many people do, and it is against the ethics of scholarship. So we have to, for each of our literature, we have to digest it this way, and then analyze it, and then start to synthesize, connecting it based on themes. For example, like now we have different settings in this research. We may be able to see, okay, if I see any other research that talked about outpatient setting, I group them together. Anyone that talked about inpatient, I group them together and see the commonalities and differences that exist among these literature. And that is how we synthesize the literature, and then we'll present it based on themes. And not just the copy and paste. Any abstract we see, we copy, we paste it, paragraph 1, another abstract, paragraph 2. That is not how we should do it. So I hope we've been able to at least get a little understanding of what literature review is all about and how it can help us to generate a very solid proposal. It's a very daunting activity, but it's also rewarding, because at the end of the day, you have a clearer understanding of what your research is all about. All right. Any question before we call it a day? Do we have any question? Any any clarifications? All right. It seems that everybody is tired and we do not have questions. Okay. So thank you very much, everybody, for paying attention, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share one or two things with you. And if you guys have any question, you can reach out to me or any maybe through the course coordinator or whoever. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, and bye for now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I will send the slide. I will send
sir.
the slide to the platform. I will send it to the WhatsApp platform.
Thank
Yeah.
you, sir. God bless you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.